my journey has been quite a long one and quite an interesting one for me. I always knew that I wanted to work in economics and finance and in natural resources and agriculture and with women. So I grew up on the Mexican border in California. So I also knew I wanted to contribute outside of the United States in places where I had skills that I could actually contribute. And I wanted to do it in a wide range of types of employers and jobs. So I actually started as a Peace Corps volunteer doing credit union field inspection in Cameroon, in rural Cameroon. And then I moved ahead to be an accountant in New York. I opened my own consulting business and ran that for 5 years in Bangladesh with a Bangladeshi business partner. We did a lot of M&E monitoring and assessments of projects. Then I was inside the government of Papua New Guinea, ending up as the first assistant secretary for finance and planning. So it was a really unique experience and a wonderful one. I then went on to advisory work in SME, in agriculture, in finance, and in gender. I was both a consultant, long-term in places like Zambia and Nepal, privatization, financial inclusion, microfinance, and I did quite a bit of short-term work as well in a number of countries, including in former Soviet Union. Then I worked for 13 years in the Asian Development Bank. And I worked in Mongolia, in China, and across Central Asia, and finally was a director for finance and public management and trade across Central Asia with a team. And now for the last 5 years, I've been the CEO of FSD Zambia. And along the way, I got married and I supported my Papua New Guinean artist husband. We raised 2 wonderful girls. Now, the highs and lows often occur in the same place and the same time. So I loved being back in Zambia and working in FSD Zambia and also being the chair of the FSD network of 9 organizations. But the unanticipated and very abrupt slashing of FSD and other organizational budgets has been a harsh reminder of how situations can suddenly change. Twice before in my career, there have been unexpected cuts that left me without money and raising a family. And one really has to learn how to roll with the punches and to scramble for whatever the next thing is going to be. A real high that I've had is the people one meets in this work, how committed, compassionate, intelligent, creative they are at all levels. And another high that I've experienced is how much innovation really occurs. From Dean Carlin and working on randomized control trials to my heads of systems in our offices here, Mawa Lungu, Charity Chikumbi, Floyd Mwansa, Lillian Chilongo, and Nea Piri. These people are creative, they're totally committed to their country, and they work very, very hard. They're a real gift. So Zambia's been hit not only by COVID-19, but also by debt challenges. So the result has been an economic nightmare with high inflation, issues of debt repayment and restructuring, so many businesses that were growing, and we were so optimistic in events, in tourism, in food, and in services, closing. The value chains are shattered because of the transport issues. Zambia has a large number of neighbors as a doubly landlocked country, and the regional transport is crucial for us here. So when borders started closing, our whole economy was very badly damaged. Zambians are a verbal and social people, and having to be isolated and protected to deal with COVID has been harsh. It's been costly financially and personally to do things as basic as buying more soap, using sanitizer, wearing masks, staying apart. There are certain kinds of activities like weddings and funerals that are very important here socially, and a lot of people would expect to come. So having an event where you have a wedding where you might have had 400 people and you're only allowed by law to have 30 and they have to be socially distanced creates some significant challenges for everyone. And in terms of what I see as the medium-term and long-term challenges and the changes that will be irreversible, I think that we can look at 3 things. First, digitization is accelerating, and along with it, better information flows on phones and with mobile money. So we're seeing that part of the distancing process is digitization, and that's going to be really important in terms of the power. It's going to be really important in terms of how people interact with communications opportunities and mechanisms. We're going to face significant challenges in making sure we have enough internet access, enough ability to communicate across phone lines. All of those kinds of things are going to be very important. and also how people use a phone. There are many people in Zambia, for example, there's 39% of the population who doesn't have access to a cell phone, has never used one. So if that's the case, and they don't have regular access to television, for example, or it's too expensive to have your radio on all the time, then how do you collect information? How do you make it work for you? This is really important. Second, people are learning how important it is to have savings and a financial plan, to learn about finance and use skills they understand, and not leave things to chance or depend on your neighbors and your family, because they may also be in serious trouble and not have money to give you. So I think that now what people are starting to think about is husbands and wives. Wives are the ones who are always relied upon to keep the money, but if there isn't that much money, what do you do? And so the relationship and the planning that takes place between husbands and wives has to really increase. We've been working quite carefully on in a number of languages. So what it means is that there was a lot of discussion about what should people learn, what should they know, and how bring home this information, discuss it with the family and with the village. This is really crucial stuff. And I think that what happened was there were so many people who were harmed by COVID. There were so many people whose businesses, financial lives, even the tiniest little shops just closed. They couldn't get access to assets. They couldn't get access to materials to sell. Value chains all collapsed. And it's, for me, what's encouraging is that even in situations where people were in desperate straits, they still maintained their optimism that the circumstances would improve. And for me, that was just not only touching, but encouraging that this was happening. And then the third thing is we need to have better product systems in finance, because if we looked at our own results here in financial inclusion in the FinScope, which is just completed at the end of last year, only about 14.5% of the population is financially healthy by their own assessment. And so we need to get services and abilities improved. We need to have better insurance systems. We need to have better communication systems. We need to have loan products from banks that don't cause the banks to actually go down in terms of the number of people who use them between 2015 and 2020. And so what we have to look at is what are the circumstances of the people that we interact with financially, and how can we change those so that they interact with them? For example, Zambia has one season a year, and it's rain fed. We don't have sufficient irrigation because it's expensive. And we're also, the density of the population is relatively low in rural areas. So what that means is that people have money once a year. And if you borrow money, you have to pay every month. So how do you pay every month when in February you used your Christmas money, you need money to plant, and you have to pay school fees for your children all at the same time? So, you know, in Zambia, we talk about two hungry times. Once is just before harvest, and the second time is in February, just at planting. And so to be able to have products that actually serve those purposes is crucial. An example of something that we worked on that was really important was early on, we realized that climate change was going to hit Zambia hard. Because once a year, if it doesn't rain, you're in trouble. If it rains too much, you're also in trouble. So we said, let's start having a look at introducing climate index insurance, which is index insurance that looks at particularly it's pretty important to be able to insure against the risk that it doesn't happen. So about 6 years ago, we started the process of testing this. And in the first year, there was no rain. And so people got paid out. And everyone got excited, and a lot more people registered for this insurance. And then in the second year, there were some areas that was drought and some areas too much rain. And so a lot of people got paid out. The insurance company said, we can't do this too much longer because we can't have this erratic and having to pay out all the time, but let's try one more year. They tried one more year. And what was very exciting about that was it rained. And so there was very few payouts, and the company started to recover its losses. And we know that with insurance, this is always the case. So we took this information to the Minister of Agriculture and her team and said, Don't you think that it's important to help Zambians to be insured against this kind of really fundamental risk? She agreed, and she actually incorporated this as a public-private partnership with all of the farmers who receive input assistance from the government, which is about 1 million families in Zambia. So those million families have had payouts when there was too much rain or when there was not enough rain in Zambia over the last 3 years. And it's for us, it's very exciting that the rest of the insurance industry is now competing in this area. They're starting to develop products for other crops. And also there's discussion about livestock insurance as well, because it's also affected. So you see these situations where when you develop products that really work, it makes a fundamental difference to the people of the country. And so maybe I want to talk a little bit more now about how financial markets can effectively address the financial constraints of low and moderate income populations and to help these people, these families, to survive and recover from the pandemic. It's going to be tough. It's tough everywhere. We have to do a lot better with informal businesses. That's really my first. And it's sort of something I've been thinking on a lot recently, is that we spend a lot of time with SMEs and we talk a lot about SMEs. And these days we're talking about women-owned SMEs, and we're talking about SMEs across the board, and we're talking about SMEs recovering in areas that have been damaged, like transport and tourism. But we don't really talk about informal business. And yet, informal business is what runs Africa. So I looked around and I said, oh, maybe we have 50,000 businesses that are registered with the government in the patent and registry office. But if a survey that was done when I first arrived in 2016 in Lusaka found, and it was done, I want to give them credit, so it was done by IPA. And the survey, in 2 days, they found over 1 million microenterprises that were unregistered, just operating. And so if that's true in Lusaka, imagine how much more true it is across Africa. And so if we don't start looking at this and paying attention to it and making sure that people can manage it, and also help people think about, well, if you're running an informal business, what's it going to take for you to go to the next stage where you can hire someone who's not a relative and actually employ them? Or where you can actually convince a company to give you some credit for assets, for materials they provide you. Or you can have some form of savings where you can use your savings to guarantee against a loan. Or you can have keyman insurance. God help us if something happens to the owner and he or she dies. What will the family do? How will they manage the business? So all of those type of things, the products that families need, the products that small enterprises, that informal enterprises need, it's really critical. I think we've focused far too much on lending and far too little on risk management, on savings, on transfers, and on mobile money, because these are really important things for microenterprises. You know, when I came here 5 years ago, nobody even thought about buying tomatoes on the corner by transferring mobile money. Now it's become fairly common. I can just buy my vegetables on the street. So we need to be able to help them save, access to working capital, investment capital, get insurance, and recognize the importance of two-way trust. I think that's another important thing. When you talk to the public, and when we looked at the level of trust in financial institutions in FinScope, it's pretty low. And when we asked them why, people said, well, they take way too long. We can't rely on our information to be correct. We're overcharged for things. And people don't take us seriously. They don't treat us as though we're, human beings with something that's important to say, especially if we're coming in off the farm. And then we asked the banks and financial institutions, so what's the problem? And they say, people come in and they have a fake ID, or they have written on their ID how old they are. When you ask them, it's a different age, or they tell you something about their business and it's not true, or they don't have information about the basic finances of their company, and they don't understand when they borrow money, instead of investing in the business, they buy a new car. I mean, all of these kinds of things do actually happen here, and they happen everywhere. And so now we have to start saying, how can we improve this dynamic between the potential and actual clients of financial institutions, and the people who are providing services from financial institutions. And I think that the notion of client centricity, where you pay attention to what the client needs and you design your products according to what the client actually needs, wants, and actually can respond to you as a financial institution in those ways. So, for example, we started looking in Zambia at what's the circumstances of women both inside financial institutions and then also as clients of financial institutions. And no other study like this had been previously done. So we worked with the Bank of Zambia in 2019, and we said, let's have a look. And it's very consistent with one of their 4 major strategic areas, which is gender equity in finance. So what do we find? Well, at that time, 1 out of 18 CEOs in the banking business was female. And the numbers were pretty grim at the top in the C-suite. So, 15, 20% were female. But then you started getting down to the mid-level and lower mid-level, and all of a sudden you find balance. So what's happening is women aren't moving towards the top. What's going on there? And that was true for banks. And then we looked at non-banks, a similar story. And then we started looking at the clients. And what we found was women had less opportunities than men to be engaged in formal financial services. But the ones who got there, they were far more likely to be loyal and stay in the company regardless of what happened. They were far better at repaying their loans, like by a large percentage. They were more likely to repay their loans on time. And even though they were earning less and borrowing less, they were saving more. So what kind of client do I want? I want that one. Those women out there who are just like that. So all of a sudden the banks woke up and they started providing different kinds of services. And that was the first step. The second step is go and see these women in their homes and their businesses and figure out what's your issue? What's your main issue? And what we find is that the main issues are risk and working capital, even more than the investment for the informal companies. And so these kinds, and we also had some surprises. We go into the rural areas and we go into suburban areas and we say, so who's operating the village shop? Wow, 60% of the people who are operating them were women. And so then we started talking about, well, what are your issues? What are your needs? You're here late at night. You do worry about your security. All of these kinds of things became very important. And we also realized that at certain levels, women trust women who are providing the service more than they trust men because they feel safer with them. And they also feel like, well, if I know you, and your husband's around, then, and I know him, then I'll feel maybe a little more comfortable, or maybe not. And also, if the person who's in the organization is known, providing me this service, there's a lot of people moving around in urban areas and financial institutions. And that makes people scared. They want somebody to be there for a while and know you. I had an interesting experience where I was talking to the governor of the central bank, along with one of my colleagues from FSD Africa. And one of the things he brought up as we were signing a new agreement, he brought up that, I have known these 2 people for almost 20 years. And that's important to me. So we also need to be thinking about how do we make financial services local? How do we make financial engagements real to the circumstances of the individuals concerned? This is really important. That's a really, really interesting question. And it's one that I come back to a lot in the course of my career. What the question of how do you develop local capabilities and local skills? And one of the things I also notice is that donors and multilaterals tend to view information coming from outside as being more valuable. And I would argue that maybe not, maybe so. I think the challenge is really, how do you find people who are very, very well skilled domestically, and they may work across the region, so may work in Rwanda, may work in Tanzania or something like that, or bringing those lessons, which are almost equally important. And with the access to the internet, people are learning a lot more of information that they can share. Wow, they do this here or they do that there. So I think that we are going full circle from people doing things only in country to people doing things only from the outside to people doing things, I hope, together. So in FSD Zambia, for example, I'm the only foreigner. We have 42 staff. And the reason why is because we were able to find and develop people who were brilliant, had great skills, learned a lot from abroad, connected to the other FSDs and talked to them all the time. So the learning was taking place, but not physically face to face. It was taking place very often by internet, by phone calls, for this kind of thing, because it was necessary under COVID. And so domestic development of skills and abilities requires you have to pay people, requires how to, what kind of things do you want to learn? What do we think is important in the economy? And we also, I think it's quite important in learning domestically, in finance and in other areas, to say, okay, what are the areas in our economy that are struggling and what are we going to need to learn? For example, one of the things that's really a challenge in a country where houses are being built everywhere because people want to have their own home and now they have access to land is, do you have enough people who can make bricks? Do you have enough people who can wire a house? Do you have enough people who can put in plumbing? Do you have enough people who know how to put in a flooring, wood flooring? I mean, these kinds of fairly basic things. We don't have enough abilities or enough training that takes place for technical and vocational education. I think this is true across the world. The only ones who really got it right were the Germans, because they have an education system that sets up for that for many, many years. But I think that this is going to be more and more important. Certification is going to be more and more important so that you know that the person you're hiring actually knows what they're doing about that broken pipe that you have in your house. And these kinds of things are, I'm talking about TVET and construction, but I also think that it's true about finance, that we don't have enough in insurance. We don't have enough people who understand about insurance and can help develop products. In mobile money, I mean, this is a hot area. A lot of youngsters are starting to work in this area. Fintech is going to be an explosive area. We're going to see a lot more work on how we legitimize with biometrics, how we make sure that the person who's standing in front of me asking me for money is actually the person who's supposed to be asking me for money or taking my savings. How do I know? So I think that transparency in terms of understanding, what should I be doing here and how should it work? Those things, not only is it important for people who live in a country, but I think it's also more important for the people who are asking them for services. So what should I be able to expect from you? If I go into the bank and I want to talk to someone about a loan, will I have someone who says, this is it, take it or leave it? Or will I have someone who says, tell me about your work, your life, tell me about your income sources, tell me about the pattern of your income and how you spend money? Then if you ask those questions, then you're going to be able to determine very quickly what kind of products and services this individual might need. I think that it's a very important area. We really need to be able to address this more effectively over time. So the notion of whether COVID has torn up financial inclusion and whether we need to build back better is highly location specific. So it's highly location specific, this issue. Because in some circumstances, in the rural areas of Zambia, we have had challenges facing financial inclusion for a long, long time. And a big part of this is people are isolated. The rural areas are very low density populations. Most everyone doesn't have a lot of income. The circumstances, the phasing of money and needs are very, very different. And so what's happened for them is they just have when you have a situation where people are poor, very often they depend on family, friends, and others in circumstances when their finances are stressed. For example, I have artist friends who, when they sell art, they have money. When they don't sell art, they're in trouble. And so of late, because of the school fees, they've called and said, can you help me with school fees? And so we then have a long talk about what that means and how I would help them, and whether I should buy some artwork or whether they should sell something later, or, and then I will ask three basic questions. One, can I please see your child's report card from last year? Two, can I please see an invoice from the school saying precisely what this money is going to pay for? Three, can you tell me how you're going to make sure that your child stays in school and is successful in this so that they can have a real future? And you would be surprised how many people cannot answer those three questions. And so it tells me that parents want their children to be in school. They want them to be educated. They want opportunities for them, but they don't know what it's going to take for them to get help if they have a problem helping the child. And so I think that the other thing that has happened as a result of COVID is that people are struggling to figure out what do they need to know so that they can make the next step. And that's really, I mean, it's a very different thing than calling your uncle and saying, "Uncle, I need 2,000 kwacha to put my daughter in school. Can you help me?" And the uncle will never send 2,000, might send 1,000. And so then that person will call an auntie or go to their neighbor or something like that. So this kind of dealing with your financials traditionally, and it happens all over the world, it's not going to work now very well. And so what people have to get more used to is, and if you need money, did you save? Did you think about this in advance? Did you make a plan? And if you need money, do you know, can you make the case that you actually need this for this purpose? So I think that how COVID has changed the circumstances is that people now have to actually think a little bit more about what's my money situation, because they can't rely on either the informal or the formal systems to bail them out when they're really in trouble. And I think that given the circumstances, that we're going to see a lot more of this kind of, got to plan, got to figure it out, got to strengthen the institutions so they help me figure this out. So when I think about the refocus on financial inclusion about COVID, I think that there's definitely going to have to be a refocus. The economies are changing. We need to be ensured that people can be helped to adapt. E-commerce, communication systems, the rise of services at a distance, how to lock in any physical value chain needs so I can meet those requirements, getting financial services to people at prices that they can afford, and payment arrangements that match the cash flows in households, which have changed a lot under COVID. All of this is pretty critical. And do I see an opportunity in the crisis? What would be my advice to the organizations? Here's my advice. Get everyone a mobile phone. If you can, get everybody a smartphone, a cheap one. Take climate change incredibly seriously. Enable weather index insurance, climate bonds, carbon taxes and credits. This is a serious thing, and the poorest will be the most negatively impacted by this. I see it already in these 5 years I've been in Zambia. There's been a significant challenge here. And when you're dependent on one season of rain, it can destroy your life. Recognize the importance of being prepared. So risk management for pandemics. We didn't have it. Look what happened to the world. 1 million people have died. More than 1 million people have died. Now, and the circumstances are grim, and they continue to be grim, even though we have vaccines and we're trying to move with them. We need to be prepared for climate disasters. We're going to have more. There have been some. We're going to have more. We need to be prepared for wars and conflicts. There's been more of those too. And whenever there's a conflict, there's always disaster in rebuilding, disasters in families, disaster in hunger, starvation, disease. I look at the places like Yemen and my heart just breaks. My heart just breaks. So getting ready for that, dealing with it, trying to prevent this kind of conflict as much as we can. And for the multilaterals and donors, here's what I have to say. Make your projects longer. 3 years is not enough. It takes 10 years to make change. So, you do 5 years, and then if it's still going, keep going. Be fully reliable once you commit. Don't just stop in the middle and say, oh, too bad we don't have money, we changed our mind. It doesn't work. And it creates damage and distrust. And it also then it enables people to enter the system and just not be serious about it, because if you're as a donor not serious, then why should anyone else be? Why should we trust you? Why should we think that you'll be reliable? Monitor the work better. I find that what happens is the bilaterals are a bit better and the multilaterals are not so good at monitoring the work in the field. And, yeah, the view is, well, this is a loan. This is a project which is a loan, so the country should take care of the money itself. Well, that doesn't necessarily translate. And it's important to be thinking about this process. Keep successes going and learn better from your failures. This is really an important area, and we don't do enough on either side. We're guilty of it as implementers. We finish something, we go, oh, we're done now, let's go somewhere else. But the bottom line is we should be talking a lot about what didn't work as well as what did. And don't think that every time you move a location that you have to do something new or something different. Sometimes what you did before that really worked well, now you can also talk to people and say, does this idea interest you? And I think that if you look at the FSD approach, which for me was an eye-opener in many, many ways, the first thing is do your research and find out what's really going on in that market, in that circumstance. And then bring all the players together and say, well, this is what we found. Does it resonate with you? Do you want to do anything about it? And then if you want to do something about it, we'll help you, but we won't pay at all. Because one of the other mistakes that gets taken in the field is that you pay for a change. The donor or the multilateral or even a grantee pays for a change, and oh, well, then I don't have to worry if it doesn't work. It wasn't my money. But in the FSD case, we require our counterpart organizations, insurance companies or banks or microfinance institutions, or even farmer groups. We say, you got to pay half. And what that means is once their skin is in the game, once their money is on the table, they're thinking very carefully if this is something they want to do. And once they want to do it, they invest themselves wholly in it. And then if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, we got to fix it. So let's tinker with it and see what we can do to fix it. And then they're also saying, what does the client want? What does the client need? What will the client pay for? So that's always something that I think is very important to be thinking about when you think about what should we be doing better. Pay attention to the client. And I have truly loved my time with the FSDs because every single one of them pays attention to every single client. And if you look at our videos on our website and you look at the information that we get when we start talking to the end clients, which we don't call beneficiaries because we find it patronizing, that they're telling us, this is my situation. This is, my husband died, I'm raising 7 children. And I grow crops in the field and it's not enough. I need to be doing things differently. So I joined a savings group. Or this group gave me a cell phone and now I can call the market in the morning and find out how much the price is for tomatoes and whether I should go to that market or the other market, which price is better. So all of these things that we think is just a little thing to buy a simple cell phone, for them, it's a life-changing experience.